Welcome to our participants. Good evening and welcome to Eastern College Week. I want to thank you for joining us as we launch the first annual College Week in USTA Eastern. This week is action-packed with a live streaming tournament that'll start tomorrow, educational webinars featuring a variety of topics presented by some of the best and most knowledgeable people within the organization. Eastern, and our first presenter is no stranger to supporting the pathway to college tennis. For over 30 years, the Eastern sections hosted one of the largest and most successful in-person college showcase days. And Eric, we've been very pleased to have Eric be a part of that event for many years. And so we're so happy to have him back to be a part of this one. For the staff on the call, these events are very near and dear to our hearts as we all played college tennis and have wonderful memories of that time of our lives. So I just want to introduce Gustavo Loza and Elena Bantowska, who many of you probably know or will get to know. And they're part of the Eastern staff and really were the visionaries behind creating College Week in Eastern. So thank you both for all your hard work and for bringing this event to life. So you're all in for a real treat with our lineup tonight. Eric Butorac's kicking us off, and he's starting our week with his story, the journey from college to pros. So I just want to say that we really want to make this very interactive. So please feel free to use the chat, the Q&A, raise your hand if you have a question. Eric's used to doing these presentations in person. So we want to try to create that environment as much as we can for him this evening. So please don't be shy, participate. And so that's going to be what we're going to pause and ask for questions and see if anybody has any questions along the way. So Eric's been a huge supporter of Eastern and all our efforts to educate and inform on the college tennis pathway. And for those of you who don't know Eric, he has a phenomenal story, an amazing journey, and I'm so happy that you guys have tuned in to be a part of it tonight. So Eric's currently the Director of Professional Tennis Operations and Player Relations at the USTA National Tennis Association. And his role is really the player liaison and operations at the US Open. So he has a very important role within the USTA. But prior to joining that, you know, I see it like Eric's just starting his career at USTA. But prior to that, I mean, he has had a successful 14-year career on the ATP Tour, reaching a career high of 17 in doubles and winning 18 doubles titles. And Eric reached the finals of the 2014 Australian Open. He's a native of Rochester, Minnesota. He's also served on the ATP Player Council and succeeded Roger Federer as its president in 2014. So, I mean, Eric is such a gem. So happy he's part of the USTA family. But his journey on the tour, but before that, you know, he was like many of you on this call, right? A junior trying to find what college he was going to go to. And so he's going to take us down this journey that he's had, this exceptional journey. And Eric, thank you so much for joining us, for helping us with another college exposure event. We're trying to do an Eastern, trying to bring as much knowledge and excitement about college tennis to Eastern families. So thanks again for being a part of this.
Thanks, Julie. Thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure to talk college tennis, especially after a long Monday of dealing mostly with COVID protocols and all the number of things that we're going to have to deal with for this year's US Open, which, again, we're incredibly excited to have 100% capacity. I think it's going to be an unbelievable tournament. The energy and Ash to have the fans back is going to be great. That being said, on the planning side of things, it has been really challenging with getting athletes into the United States and just all of the different logistical challenges with that COVID has presented for putting on a tournament. So, but we're going to work through those. We're going to get it done. And we're excited to have everyone back stateside for a great US Open series and tournament. But that's not why we're not here today. Again, loved it. Always happy to share my story, kind of talk a little bit about my journey, which took a few twists and turns along the way, and kind of give some insights as to what I think kids should be looking at, what parents should be looking at. And really kind of go through kind of the three takeaways, just talking about kind of the homework I think that needs to be done on the front end, how you can find the right fit, and then really, how you can invest properly into the kind of the college tennis experience, and that can lead to just what big dividends it can pay truly for the rest of your life. So, yeah, I'll kind of share my journey, but as Julie mentioned too, please jump in on the chat, and if you want me to elaborate on something, if you think I've kind of dancing around a certain topic, please put it in the chat. It's like she said, I love doing these things in person. The webinar is not my favorite mode of presenting. So if you have something you want to hear about, please put it in there, and I'll try to address it. So, all right.
Well, thanks, Eric. And I know this U.S. Open, I'm sure you learned a lot from last year's U.S. Open, and with a lot of sports now back in running their large events, unlike sort of the situation you were in last year. I'm sure you have had a lot of takeaways and some best practices to make this one unbelievable. So I can't wait to see everybody out there at the Open. But yes, that's not why we're here today. We're here to talk about college tennis. And Eric, so a lot of the people joining us this evening are high school sophomores, juniors, maybe some seniors. And, this is a big decision for these kids. And as you know, when you were faced with that, having to make that decision, I think a lot of what you're going to be able to talk about and what made your story so successful was really those key factors that helped you in selecting the best fit, finding the best school that fit, was your best fit. And so on that note, like, what were you looking for in a school when you first started the college search process? What were you looking for? I know you initially landed at Ball State, and then sort of how did you get there? And then you also made a decision that we're going to talk about a little bit later on, where you transitioned to another school. And sort of what your decision making was like around that process. If you could elaborate a little more on that, that would be great. Yeah.
Yeah. So I grew up in Rochester, Minnesota. I was not a highly ranked national junior by any means. I did play a couple of national tournaments, but was not recruited by many schools in the Big Ten, and had to do sort of a lot of the recruiting process on my own, reaching out to coaches, and trying to kind of get myself in front of them as much as possible. What to look for. I was lucky to have a dad who played college tennis as well. So he helped guide my process a little bit, and kind of he helped me just address just the two, quick things to look for as it relates to a college tennis program. And, for him, it was his coach who had an unbelievable impact in his life. So he was, really helping me try to, meet with as many coaches as possible, reach out to them, speak to them on the phone, because for him, the coach was a huge kind of mentor and presence in his life. And then also, really looking closely at the team. I think when you get to college tennis, depending on the program, but, regardless of that too, you're going to spend a lot of time, with your teammates. So taking a good look at the types of people that are on these teams. Is it primarily from one area of the country? Is it a lot of international players? Just the types of kind of attitudes they have. If you're able to attend one of their dual matches and kind of watch how they compete, watch how they call lines, watch how they interact with their teammates or how they interact with their opponents. But just really taking a good look at the coach and the team were the two things that I did most as I kind of started my journey. Like I said, I reached out to a lot of the schools like Notre Dame and Duke and, these top programs, and wasn't able to get a call back for many of them. But I did end up deciding on Ball State. Ball State at the time was a top 50 program in the country, still is kind of one of the premier sort of mid-major schools. And was originally one of those schools, coming from a small town in Minnesota. I was number one on my high school team when I was an 8th grader. and was the best player in my city, by the time I was a freshman in high school. So, I had the mentality of I wanted to be around better players. Right? I wanted to be pushed. I'd never had that environment before, and I decided that's what I really want. So I wanted to try Division I, and I wanted to be a part of kind of the program that plays the best of the best. And I also wanted to be on a team, where I really had to fight for my lineup spot. That I was, pushed, and I thought that I could do that. When I got to Ball State, I started out as kind of number 10, 11. I was a walk-on the team. Kind of through the dual match season, I found my way into kind of a 5, 6, 7 position in the singles lineup, kind of a 2, 3, 4 doubles position, and had a good freshman year. By the end of my freshman year, I was maybe losing a few more matches, kind of in that freshman slump that can happen to a lot of players. And started kind of working myself out of the rotation. And that was where I sort of had a little bit of, just sort of a moment to realize that it maybe wasn't the perfect fit, because I knew I was playing a match against Louisville, and the following match 2 days later was against Notre Dame, and my parents were driving down to watch the match. And I knew I had lost a few matches in a row. I was playing number 6 against Louisville. And again, all these thoughts are playing out in my head, right? Even while we're playing Louisville, that, if I lose now, my parents might not get to see me play. They might bench me. And I remember having this feeling of, looking around at the team, and I was playing 6 and looking at the number 5 court, and then looking at the player playing number 7 exhibition singles, as I was losing my match, and thinking, man, I hope they lose too. And I was like, wow, that's just kind of an odd feeling to have, right? That you're in this team environment, you're supposed to want your teammates to win. And I kind of came to the conclusion, that, maybe that wasn't the best position for me to be in, right? That, one, I think it's sort of something that maybe college coaches don't talk about enough with their players, in that, tennis is really an individual sport, and we bring it together for high school tennis or for college tennis, but that's sort of challenging to kind of mix the individual and team nature of the sport. And I think the best coaches out there do address that issue and really help talk their players through it. For me, that was sort of my first moment of, wow, I'm not sure this is the perfect fit for me. That I think that, the idea of kind of having to constantly, be fighting for my lineup spot every single week was actually hurting my practice. So I do share that story for a lot of people, because I think there are a lot of junior players out there who have that same mentality that I had, that I just have to be around better players. And if I'm around better players, I'm going to be a better player. And so for me, I think it created a lot more stress in my life than did benefit. And it took me kind of that freshman year of my college experience to sort of realize that. And then, mid sophomore year, even though we were on a great team, we won the conference tournament, I played the majority of my lineup positions. The coach was wonderful. The teammates were some friends that I still keep in touch with today. But at that moment, I realized, no, this isn't the right fit for me. And so that's why I decided to make the change in the middle of my sophomore year and transfer to a Division III school in Minnesota called Gustavus Adolphus College.
Well, I just learned a lot more about you from that. And I've heard you speak a few different times. So thanks for sharing that, like personal reflection. And, that must have been a tough decision, going from Division I to Division III. So what was that process like for you? And like you said, some players might find themselves in this position. I know Gustavo on our staff was somebody who found himself in a similar position where he, transferred from one school in the middle of the 4 years that he was getting his undergrad degree. So, so what was that situation like? And just tell us a little bit more about your Gustavus Adolphus journey.
Yep.
And
so again, I think that, transferring was certainly difficult. At the time, it was probably one of the harder things I've ever been through, right? To have to sort of really kind of change your life and kind of really step away from one situation and make the change. I don't recommend anyone, to go into college knowing that you would like to do that. If it happens, I think it happens. And for me, it obviously led to kind of bigger and better things. But I think that's like, you mentioned it at the beginning, Julie, and we've spoken about this in the past. The more you can seek out the right fit for you in college, the better. And I reached out to like 3 or 4 coaches yesterday when I was just, kind of organizing some of my thoughts for what to share today. And I just said, what would you guys tell players? And, one of my friends who's the coach at Brandeis said, many players or even parents especially think that finding the college program is really about finding the best program that you can get into. Or is it trying to get into an Ivy League school or a NESCAC? It's about trying to reach to the highest possible level. And I really don't think that's what people should be seeking, that it's about finding what is the right fit for you. And I think there's programs out there that practice 4 hours a day, and there's programs out there that practice 4 hours per week. And I think you need to, as a player, be very honest with yourself on a number of fronts. I think you have to be honest about where your level of play is. With metrics like UTR, it's pretty easy to look at a college roster and look at your own UTR and see where you would fit on that team. I think you need to be honest about what position you want to be on a team. I've heard coaches say many times that they really have 3 categories of player, that they have sort of their top players. They're players who are going to come in and play 1 or 2 singles, and they're going to be, really sort of the focus of the program. If you're in that position, you're going to be the best player on the team. You're probably going to get more attention from the coach, but, you're not going to be practicing with better players, players better than you every day. I think you have sort of your mid lineup players, which is where I fell at Ball State, which is people who are maybe going to be in the lineup, maybe going to be just out. Or you have the third category, which is sort of what people call like a prestige player. And that may be someone who's on the team, but is really not competing for a lineup spot. And when I was at Gustavus, we actually carried 25 to 30 players on our roster. And so as you can imagine, you only start 6 players in college tennis. So anyone in that 15 to 30 position on our team, they weren't realistically ever getting into a dual match that counted. We might play against some lower ranked teams, but they were there because they loved wearing the Gustavus warm-up. They loved the practices. They loved being a part of the program. And if that's what you're looking for, that can be a really great fit. But I think sort of to kind of have these honest conversations with yourself about what your level, about your commitment, and about, your kind of role, the more you can think this through on the front end, it will make for a better fit. And I think even the middle one, the commitment one, is extremely important, because I hear coaches, many of my friends are now college tennis coaches, and they meet with players, or they meet with parents, and they say, yeah, my son or my daughter wants to practice this many hours, or yes, they're going to play tournaments all summer long. But what happens if they're not going to make that commitment, about practice, if they're not going to make that commitment to play summer tournaments because they have an internship at JP Morgan instead, then it really leads to a bad relationship, or some sort of friction once you're in the program. And so that's where I think you want to get, the true college experience, and you want a great experience. You want to address this fit on the front end as much as you possibly can. But then you also know that, I guess it happened to Gustavo as well, and it happened to me. If you don't have the right fit and you think there's a better fit somewhere else, the transferring always is an option. So definitely not the ideal route, but it is always there. So for me, again, as you mentioned, I transferred to a D3 school in Gustavus. I thought the practices maybe at Ball State were a bit long for my liking. I felt like the stress of all of it was a bit more than I wanted. I wanted more balance. I wanted to kind of, to be able to join a fraternity, to do all these things. Once I got to Gustavus, I wound up doing the, 90-minute to 2-hour practice, and then staying for another hour or 2 on my own. So I was practicing probably the same amount that I was at Ball State anyways. It was just sort of in a different context. And then I found that, kind of walking in and being the number 1 player on the team, for me, was much more comfortable, and it was much more freeing at practice. I was a very self-motivated guy, so I didn't have trouble, finding motivation playing against the number 5 or 6 player on the team every day. And I got so much attention from my coach. We did so many individual workouts, and he was a much bigger presence in my life than at my first program. So there was a lot of benefits that worked out really well for me at Gustavus.
Yeah, and I know you highlighted a few of these, but any other major differences between the D1 and the D3, just from the training perspective, just a schedule of play?
Sure.
Are there any major differences that stood out? Because I know that there's probably a lot of players on this call that are looking just at D3. Some might be in a similar situation. Do I go D1? Do I go D3? So any other major differences between the two? And maybe there aren't any.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really depends a lot on the program.
Yep.
I mean, I think anytime you enter into a D1 program and you're going there with a scholarship attached to it, I think you have a sort of a commitment there to a certain amount of time and that you're really planning to put into your tennis. That being said, there's Division I teams that practice at very different levels. And with Division III schools as well. I mean, even at Gustavus, we traveled very much like a Division I program. We got to go on a trip to Hawaii every year and California and do, really big trips. So I would say that our program may not have been that different to a D1. Now, there are D3 programs which are much more relaxed and have much less commitment. So I think it's a lot about, looking at the schools and reaching out to the coach and asking those questions. I think coaches love nothing more than to talk about their programs. So I know it's easy for the parents to do it. I always tell every kid, please do it on your behalf. Reach out to the coach. You ask the questions. Like, this is the first time I feel like, at least for me, it was, that I had to make a big decision kind of for my adult life, right? And you have to make it when you're often 16 or 17 years old. But it's the first big decision. So really take that on. And, you go talk to the coach and you decide if it's who you want to play for. So I encourage them to do that as much as possible.
Yeah, that's really good advice. So, okay, so now you've had this journey as a junior player, maybe not the best top-ranked junior player in the country, seeking your college pathway here. So you decide to land on a D1 program and then realize it's not the right fit for you, and you transfer to a D3 program, just happened to be one of the best D3 programs in the country. And now you're winning at the Division III, right? I mean, you had a great story, I remember, at the NCAAs. And how that attitude, you mentioned the attitude you had in the Division I when you were trying to get that spot to play so your parents could come watch you play, and how you're sort of hoping your teammates might lose too. So, but when you were playing at the NCAAs, for Gustavus Adelphus, you had a completely different story, right? I mean, you pushed yourself, and you were able to get your team to the next level there. I remember you shared that story with me once, and I just thought that was a great motivational story.
Yeah. So Gustavus, I mean, even within my 3 seasons there, we had some ups and downs. I started out as the number 2 player on the team when I got there. I remember talking to my coach after one of my first practices, and I started saying, what's it going to take for me to get to number 1? How do I need to, pass Nick and be number 1? And I remember him pulling me aside and just being like, Eric, this whole journey that, you're on, it's so much bigger than playing number 1 or 2 or 6. It just really doesn't matter. It's about how good you can be as a tennis player. And we're going to spend every day trying to help you become the best player you can be. And that helped kind of set the stage for sort of my, eventual pro career, which came, further down the road. But that was a really great kind of basic philosophy to start with. I quickly did become the number 1 player on the team. We went to, I think I made the finals of the NCAAs that year. So came back as my junior season as the number 1 ranked player in the country. Our team was number 1 in the country. Unfortunately, that was the year where I decided to really experience, a lot more of what college had to offer. That was when I joined a fraternity. I had a girlfriend. I had many other, priorities as well. Unfortunately, we got all the way to the NCAA semifinals playing against Emory. Again, like I said, we were number 1. I was number 1. I was playing a guy who I'd beaten earlier in the season. And of course, the match, as it does, comes down to 3-all with the match on my racket into a 3rd set tiebreaker, and I lost it. And it was sort of that moment that, again, coach pulled me aside afterwards and said, this is what regret feels like. There was 5 seniors on that team who all did everything right, and I was the one who messed around and cost us a national championship. But we were able to talk about it over the course of the whole summer and set a plan for the following season, which was, okay, let's get as good as you can get. But now that feeling of regret. And now we can sort of say, all right, what are we going to do this year to make sure that you don't have that feeling come NCAAs next year? And I remember just, again, we did everything from setting up morning practices on Wednesdays and Fridays, because Tuesdays and Thursdays were the nights when everyone would go out to the all the local bar specials. And I knew that if I had an early morning practice, I wouldn't go out. And I would set up extra weight sessions, so I knew that I could get through a long third set match. And just every little step of the way that whole senior year, I put things in place that by the time I got to nationals in my senior season, I was totally relaxed. I knew that I'd done everything in my power to be prepared for the situation. And of course, like things often do, we went and we finished third as a team, and I won all my matches there, and I ended up winning the singles and the doubles. Sometimes it doesn't always work out that way, but this year, luckily it did. So that sort of set the stage for what came next, which is, what do you do when you're the best player in Division III tennis? Most Division III players do not turn pro. The ones who had in recent history hadn't really done much with it. But I sort of posed it back to my coach, is like, what do you think I should do? And I remember him saying, I think, Eric, you need to see how good of a tennis player you can be. And you've gotten a lot better in the last year, and I think you should keep trying. And when you're done improving, then you should come home and be a teacher. So I never did end up being a teacher, but I did come home 14 years later to work for the US Open.
So I know, and that story, sometimes it's hard to hear, but I think had a pivotal moment in your life. And obviously that back to that fit, you talked about how a good coach was an important thing for you to find that right fit, and how you interviewed a lot of coaches in the process, and some great advice from that coach. So now, now you're in, did you ever, I guess I'd start out by saying, did you ever imagine you'd be in the finals of the Australian Open?
No, I think, again, even I'm a realist, and, I can plug my TED Talk if anyone wants to watch it. It was shared.
Everyone needs to watch the TED Talk, by the way. It's amazing.
I share the story on there as well. I was probably, I was more of one of those people. I had trouble believing that I was as good as my ranking was. I couldn't, if I looked at the rankings and saw I was ranked 100 in the world, I couldn't even believe that, let alone imagine something even better. So no, I think even when I went on tour, it was, I was moving to France with some friends. We started playing money tournaments. We did that for about a year before we kind of stumbled into the futures level and started playing some of those. Even playing all those years, I never really imagined that it would become a career. I think I was very much living in the moment. I think I was lucky, actually, for a lot of ways that, one, I think my coach framed it a certain way. Like I said, that it was all of our conversations were around, are you getting better? Are you improving? What's your classement, they call it, is the French word for ranking and for their system. Is your classement, going in the right direction? And, I always felt like I was winning, even when a lot of players out at those lower levels feel like they're losing. So I think I was able to do a couple of things. One, I leaned a lot on my community. So I really brought all of my Gustavus friends with me. They lived through the tour vicariously through my emails, or they would come visit me when they could. And I sort of became a champion for all of Division III tennis. And I think I fed off that energy. So it just, like I said, it just, it's a phase of professional tennis when a lot of people are really struggling and talking about how hard things are. And I think through the coach and also through the team, I was able to frame it for me as it being successful. Even though it was an incredibly hard journey, that there's nights where I was, sleeping on park benches and, running out of money again and again, and having my parents took out a loan at one point against their house. I had a couple alumni help me out at one point. I mean, it was like I was really kind of getting through it all. But at least looking back on it, I felt like it always felt like a successful journey. And I felt like so much of that was because of how it was framed. And it really all draws back to my college tennis experience. So I think that's where a lot of like, if you truly can kind of do this correctly, not that everyone has to go on tour and live this sort of dream scenario that I was lucky enough to experience, but that I think you can truly get an experience that is special. I think you can find a mentor for you, which is really helpful. I had 17 teammates fly out to Newport, Rhode Island for my wedding, and my wife, who played at Dartmouth, had 12 teammates fly out as well. And she had maybe not the storied career that I had, but she had a similar experience, and that she had a really special coach at Bob Dallas and Dartmouth. And she had teammates who she still calls some of her best friends today. So I think, for the sake of this conversation, those are some of the reasons that I was able to be successful on the tour, and the college tennis part of the journey is super important.
So I have some questions here from the audience, but if anybody does have a question, raise your hand and we will get to you, because we do want to keep this interactive. How did you succeed in balancing the academic courses along with giving your best to the college tennis team?
Yeah, that's a challenge. And it depends a lot on the type of program that you're signing up for. So again, back to the fit question, I think you want to, if you're a player looking at a school, you want to talk to the coach, but these are the questions you really want to ask the players on the team, if you can get time with them, is to just, what does their day look like? What does their week look like? But how do you balance it? I mean, this is the time in your life, I feel like, when everyone gets a crash course on time management, right? And, I have 3 small kids now. So, I mean, again, if I look back on my college days, I had all the time in the world. But, when you're in it, when you're 18, 19 years old, you do feel super busy, right? But I think it's just, it's the ultimate kind of life lesson of time management and how you can balance those things. And again, I made a huge mistake my junior year, right? I got my priorities way out of whack. I was partying too much. I was socializing, and that became a huge priority. And then I realized that something I cared a lot about, my tennis, was failing, and that hurt to have to deal with that. And I'm still, it still chokes me up when I have to speak about it. So, but those are the lessons that you learn, right? And that's kind of how life goes. And yeah.
Well, it's definitely something everyone's going to face at some point in college. As someone who went through the experience, it's definitely something you have to balance: the social side of things, the tennis side of things, and the academic side of things, right?
Absolutely.
They're all, yeah. So it's a real life story for people. So I thank you for sharing it with us. So I knew we did get a question in the chat, but before we jump to that, I do want to, question did come up about how important the mental side of the game is. And we know that's becoming more of a public conversation now. Mm-hmm. And what are some of the things that you have done or you would have done to improve yourself mentally?
Well, that's like a whole separate webinar. We can go into that one. I mean, that's sort of, again, there's so many different mental aspects that you can even break down into categories, right? The one sort of, maybe it's mental, you call a little bit tactical, is kind of the thing I love so much about the game of tennis. I think a lot of people, especially at younger ages, are out there hitting balls, hitting forehands and backhands. And the more you start to kind of invest in, what is it that I do well on the court, and kind of start looking at your opponent, match by match, and, what does my opponent not like to do? And how can I, turn this into sort of a one-on-one battle, me versus my opponent, and play the match on terms that are, are better for me and worse for him. And that's kind of one side of the mental game that I really love. And I love talking it through with younger athletes as they kind of become 14, 15, 16, and that becomes a real sort of, they have a greater understanding for what's happening on the court. And from sort of a mental / kind of emotional standpoint, Again, my college coach was super helpful with me. We had a few different things that we did along the way. Number one, he ingrained early on a mantra of focusing on what you can control. He sort of lived by a thing called the Serenity Prayer, and that was what we heard again and again. And that was a really helpful sort of starting point for anything, right? If you're spending energy focusing on things that are outside of your control, the weather, the time that your match was scheduled, the balls, the court, how your opponent is playing, how your opponent is calling the lines. There's so many things in tennis that we waste energy on that are outside our control. So if you can sort of wipe that slate clean, your mind becomes incredibly free and incredibly just focused on sort of the pure game of tennis. So that's a really nice sort of baseline to have. The next one we did a little bit of, and this actually came from another coach that I had on tour, was starting to rate after you play the three things. And he called it your head, your heart, and your lungs. So your head was how mentally engaged were you for this whole practice or this whole match? Were you, tactically thinking your way through it? Your lungs, you could do your lungs or your legs, but basically how fit were you? Were you able to push hard all the way till the very end? And then the final was your heart. Were you emotionally invested, the whole way? Did you really, fight till the very end and kind of give it your all? And we would talk through these different things. So there's a number of different, things to talk it through. But, I have a 7-year-old who's, playing baseball and soccer and tennis. And we already start to talk about some of these things. And again, he wants to talk about whether he got a hit or whether he got an out on the drive home, and all I will let him talk about is, were you a good teammate? Did you, what would tell me one thing you did that was good sportsmanship, to one of your opponents? Or, did you have a positive attitude through the whole game, even when you struck out, things like that. So these are definitely things that can be talked about, I think, at a young age and kind of help, encourage that growth. But it's definitely, it's a learning process, and tennis is just an awesome sport to try to figure it out, because you're out there all alone, or maybe you have one teammate, but for the most part, there's no one that can come rescue you, and you do have to figure it out yourself. So it's such a phenomenal sport for that reason.
Yeah, agreed. So the question in the chat, and I'm going to get to this one now. First off, it says thank you. And then they want to know, how was the financial struggle after college when traveling? And do you have any tips?
The financial struggle was immense. So how my story went, I think I wrote to a bunch of alumni from Gustavus, a couple family friends. I was able to fundraise $10,000. I moved to France with 2 friends. I mean, we literally slept in our car. We slept on park benches. We stretched that money as long as we possibly could. Eventually it ran out. I was able to get a couple more from some sponsors as a loan. Like I said, at one point I tried to quit because I ran out of money after about a year and a half. My parents took out a new mortgage on their home, even though they paid it off. So that added another weight on my shoulder as I was playing those matches, knowing that my parents, was on the line. So it was a lot. The financial struggle was there, but I do think that there was also sort of an investment from my end, that some players whose parents were able to just cut them a huge check and they could travel freely and stay in nice hotels and not have to worry about things, where I was much more in the case of, hey, I was personally invested, and if tennis didn't work out, which I thought it was not going to work out, transparent, even a couple of years in, I would have still bet that I would have never made $1 playing pro tennis, but I knew that I could, pay these debts back over time, and I would someday have a career that would pay them back. So I wasn't super concerned, but the financial struggle is real, and it's hard to break through, and that there's plenty of articles written about how professional tennis is as challenging as any professional sport out there to try to break through, because it involves worldwide travel. It involves a sport where the whole world is playing, and there's great athletes from all around the world that are trying to break through for really only a few hundred spots where people are actually making a living doing this. So it's super challenging, but they say if it was easy, everyone would do it.
So you talked a little bit about how college prepared you for the tour. I mean, were you a big doubles player when you were a junior?
Hmm. I actually was. So I was
Okay.
lucky that my dad runs a small tennis club in Rochester, Minnesota, like a public park facility in the summers. And he had a standing 2:30 game. It still operates today at 2:30 on every Sunday. All the best players in town, if you're like a 4.5 or above, you can come out and play. And it's usually probably a dozen players, mostly kind of middle-aged men. There's a few women, a couple of juniors who will come sometimes, but anyone's allowed to come and play. And it's just sort of a round robin sort of doubles that he'll organize every Sunday. So from when I was 10 years old, I would show up to this game and I would be like the odd man in if, they needed me. So I was playing doubles with, older men, most commonly when I was 10, 11, 12, 13 years old. So I was learning how to use signals and how to play, conventional doubles at a young age. So I think I attribute a lot of my success to that, to getting kind of an early jump start. I played a lot of doubles in high school. It was a big part of my, college development as well. My coach put a lot of focus in it. Helps that I'm tall and left-handed and serve well, and so my skills translated. Yeah, it was, the doubles. I got kind of ahead of the curve, I think, on that one. And then it also became a little bit of my identity, right? That I was a really good doubles player, and I sort of fed off that, and it gives you confidence, and then you want to practice it more. So yeah, again, it was, nothing was strategically planned. It was just, that was how I spent my Sundays for my whole childhood. And sure enough, it led to a career.
Well, that's great. I know we're trying to sanction more team events in the section where more doubles is included, because we know how important that's going to be when players do go on to play in college, and to really just get people prepared for that team environment. Because like
Yeah.
you said earlier, so much of the junior tour is very solo. You're pretty much alone, and you go to these tournaments. Sometimes it feels very sterile. There's not a lot of socializing going on. But when you're in a team environment, like our zonals and some of these other team events that are out there, it creates just a different atmosphere. But that's what college tennis is going to feel like, is you're going to have that team behind you. I know junior team tennis, Gustavo oversees the junior team tennis program, and that's a great way for kids to be able to play singles and doubles and get that team environment that college is going to prepare them for. So I know Scott Tribley is joining us shortly after our presentation here with you, and he's going to kick off the video with the NCAAs and just the excitement around college tennis and how we can get everybody excited about their next steps. But I know we've talked a lot about you as a player and you on the tour and now you with the USTA, but at some point you were also a college coach, and you were the assistant coach at Harvard. So you bring that little bit of knowledge for this group too. So I would just say, I guess, before we close and open it up, if anybody has any other questions, why did you decide to get involved in as assistant coach at an Ivy League school? How involved were you? Were you with the recruiting process while you were there? And anything else you could elaborate on that environment?
Sure. Yes, that actually came from, I was living with my now wife in Boston and wanted a place to practice. Walked over to the Merce Center, introduced myself to the Harvard coach and said, can I practice with some of your players? I started doing that a little bit at kind of off times. And after, maybe a few months, they said, hey, look, we need a volunteer assistant coach. Would you consider, signing on to do that? And you can come to practice. And I actually sort of flipped it on them, which I think they weren't quite ready for, which is, I think I really want to be a college tennis coach when I graduate. So I will be the volunteer assistant, but I want to do it I only want to do it if you promise to teach me how to, how to set up a budget for the team, how to go through the compliance process, how to recruit a player. I wanted to truly learn because I thought that was going to be the next step in my journey. So yeah, I was exposed to all of it at Harvard. Dave Fish was the head coach then. Andrew Rube was the assistant. Now he's the head. Two of my best friends in this world now. And they showed me everything that it takes to run a college tennis program. And I think they do a wonderful job. So yeah, everything from hosting recruits and meeting with parents, I was very much involved in that, to the on-court aspect of it, to the planning, the training, the off-season, the whole thing. It was an awesome experience. And I know I didn't end up going into college coaching. I took this job with the US Open, which has been great. But if I had to bet, I think I will have a stint as a college tennis coach before I'm done working. It's too close to my heart. And there was rumors of a big school opening up recently, and I was already talking to my wife about trying to throw my name in the ring. So it's just too special of an experience, I think, and having the relationship that I had with my coach and the impact he had on my life, I think that I need to be back in that forum at some point. I don't know when that is, but I think it will come.
Well, I definitely see you there at some point. But you're doing such a great job at your position at USTA. So we're happy to have you in that role. So it looks like we got another question from the audience. And Gustavo, Elena, if you guys want to jump off and ask Eric anything before we bring this to a close. But there is a question here. What would you suggest or a tip for a Division III tennis player after college if trying to go pro? Any right steps?
Yeah, so I get this one a lot, right? I got a call this year from the guy who won the Division III Nationals and who wants to go pro, and asked me for sort of the blueprint. And I think a lot of people ask me this question, and I think they're looking for sort of a miracle answer, right? They're like, "Oh, you played Division III and then you played Wimbledon. Like, how did that happen?" And I'm like, "Well, it wasn't one month where I got really good. It was 3.5 years of consistent practice that led from me winning the NCAAs to me playing at Wimbledon. It didn't happen overnight. So I guess the short answer is it's a journey, right? And everyone's on this journey. And for me, it was about trying to be the best tennis player I could be. And that was always the focus. It was never about winning titles. It was never about just making it into this level event. It was like, how good can I get at this great sport? So, I guess it's a lot about if you can look through that lens and assess, hey, here's where I am now. This is how, what I'm ranked. This is my level, but also this is how good my serve is. This is how good my forehand is. We had little goals with me and my coach where it's like, today I want my slice backhand to get 1% better, and we're going to work on that. And I'm going to learn how to drive the slice deep in the court. I'm going to learn how to drive it, sharply cross court. I'm going to learn how to disguise a drop shot, and we're going to spend 45 minutes on that shot alone and walk off the court 1% better at tennis because I've improved my slice backhand. So focusing on that, and trying to figure out how do you continue to improve, right? And just the development of your game. And then along that path, you got to play the right appropriate level of event, right? If you're one of the better players in Division III, yes, it's probably right to start trying some of the UTR 25K events, or see if you can get into those. Can you get into a futures of a qualifying of a futures? Do you know someone who has a wild card? What are the best money tournaments in your area? For me, it was moving to Europe and playing, club tennis and money tournaments over there, but kind of assessing where your level is and then going in there and then just trying to make it to the next level, kind of step by step.
So on that note, I am going to recommend, if you guys haven't heard Eric's TED Talk, because I think that's a nice segue into, he talks a lot about this in his TED Talk, which is titled, "Don't Dream Big, Dream Small." And if you guys haven't seen it, you got to check it out. Maybe when we send the recording out, we can include a link to Eric's TED Talk. Everything you say, you can apply a lot of the things that you say in there to anything in life, which is great. It just works with anything. So I'm going to open it up. We have a couple minutes left. If anybody has anything else for Eric, otherwise, if you see him at the US Open National Tennis Center, say hi.
You do.
Julie, can I jump in for a second?
Of course.
Yeah. Eric, thank you so much. This was, I've been through college tennis a little bit and loved it too. So just listening to what you've been through and your path is just pretty amazing. I have a little different question, and hopefully that's going to help everybody here on the call. top 3 books or anything that you want to recommend to these guys, to focus on. It might be even current age. It doesn't have to be college. Anything that you think that might help them think or manage their time,
Man.
or
That's a great question. I was not prepared for that one.
I know all the books Eric's reading right now are probably for the ages of 7 and under.
I do a lot of that. Yes. Yeah, I don't have a great book. My college coach, before he passed away, wrote a book called Let Love Serve, which again has sort of been, he was my guide through all of this. His name was Steve Wilkinson. And he wrote it, he was diagnosed with cancer and was given like 9 months to live. And I remember, he was interviewed after kind of getting that diagnosis, and he said, now I have the opportunity to live out my philosophy, which is to focus on the things that I can control. It was like, wow, that was a really powerful statement. But for me, that book just has a lot of the kind of basic philosophies for how to be a tennis parent, how to be a tennis coach, kind of how to run a tennis program. And for me, it was kind of my everything. I was able to live it through him. But if you never got to meet him, that was sort of the one that you can at least go back and read his work. But I need to be more prepared for that question. I should have a 1, 2, and 3. Eric. You're right.
Alina's setting up the interview questions here, right?
That's a good question.
I also have one, Julie, from the audience.
Yeah.
I think, Eric, you motivated everybody. You motivated me. I'm going to go hit a few serves tomorrow for sure. But one of the questions we got is, what was your most rewarding win in either college or pro career?
Most rewarding win. So again, I was lucky to have a few good ones, right? We beat the Bryans in Australia and made the final. I beat Rafa and Lopez once at Indian Wells. So I had some kind of high profile wins. So those are certainly fun to have on the resume. The biggest one for me, and I keep my trophy at home, is really the only trophy I still have. But when we won in Estoril, Portugal, which was my first victory on clay. Growing up in Minnesota, I never played any tennis on clay. College tennis was not on clay. Even the futures that I selected, I would never choose a clay court tournament. So really my clay court exposure, I remember learning how to play clay court tennis at the Monte Carlo Country Club, and then the following week in Barcelona. And I was so bad, like just so terrible. I didn't know how to slide. I was falling over. And this is in 2007. And again, I hardly won a match, I think, for 2 or 3 years. And then I think it was 2010. My partner, Scott Lipsky, and I got to Estoril, and we played a practice set against these guys, and we lost like 6-0. They had enough time for another set. They beat us 6-1. We thought we were just going to get killed. And we wound up playing the top seeds in the first round. We beat them. We won another match. We beat another good team. And went on to win the tournament. And to me, that was sort of like, it was just such an important victory in my life, because it was something that I'd struggled with so much, and something that I continued every year. I was not one of those players who would avoid the clay on the tour. I would go and I would play the full clay court season from Monte Carlo all the way through the French Open, and just take a beating year after year, but just keep kind of like knowing that it was the right thing to do. And it took years for it to pay off, right? And then I think I won 18 titles, you said, Julie, but I wouldn't be surprised if 5 or 6 of them were on clay by the time I finished. So it was really just like that was for me. I mean, no one will ever remember that tournament or care that much, but for me, it was important because of all of the journey behind it.
That's great, Eric. I like to end on that. Thank you so much, Eric, for your time, for being with us, for helping us get out this great word and excitement about college tennis and the college tennis pathway.
Well, thank you for having me on.
Good luck with the
It's
USTA.
always fun to share my stories. It's not often I get to do it these days, so thank you for the invite.
Well, you're an amazing resource, and just happy for the participants that were able to be a part of it tonight. So good luck with the Open, and we'll see you soon.
All right, take care.
All right, have a good night, everybody. See you in a couple minutes.